The clipboard was the first sign of trouble. It was a perfect Tuesday in early October, the kind of suburban afternoon that made you believe in the promises of the glossy real estate brochures. The sky was an unapologetic blue. The lawns were a uniform, chemically induced green, and the air smelled of freshly mulched flower beds. I was on my knees, patiently weeding around the base of the cedar fence that framed our front yard, when a precise, well-timed shadow fell over me. "Good afternoon, Cole?" I looked up. Karen Dawson stood on the public sidewalk, just beyond my property line. She was the president of the Northwood Pines Homeowners Association, a position she wielded less like a public servant and more like a monarch surveying her fiefdom. Today, she was in full royal regalia, crisp linen pants, a polo shirt the color of bleached bone, and a visor that sat on her lacquered blonde hair like a crown. In her hand, she held the clipboard. "Karen," I said, rising to my feet and wiping the dirt from my hands onto my jeans. "Everything okay?" "Just conducting a routine architectural review," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Her voice was a smooth, practiced instrument of polite condescension. "We've had a few new families move in, and the board felt it was a good time to ensure everyone is aligned with community standards." She made a show of consulting her clipboard, though I knew she had the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions memorized like scripture. She took a small, deliberate step to her right and sighted down the line of my fence. One eye closed. "You know, Cole, I've always admired this fence. Western red cedar. A lovely choice." "Thanks," I said, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Compliments from Karen were never just compliments. They were the preamble to an attack. We had it approved by the ACC 3 years ago. The paperwork is in our files. "Oh, I'm sure it is," she said, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "The thing is, the board has recently been clarifying some of the more ambiguous language in the CC&Rs regarding setbacks, Section 7.3 specifically." She looked up, her smile now a thin, unyielding line. "Based on the new interpretation, your fence appears to be non-compliant. It encroaches on the 15-foot setback line from the front curb by approximately 18 inches. I stared at her, then at my fence. It stood exactly where it had for 3 years. A silent, well-behaved boundary marker. 18 inches. My neighbor to the left had a small retaining wall that was at least 2 feet closer to the curb. The house across the street had a massive oak tree planted by the developer themselves, well within the 15-foot line she was quoting. "The rule has been 15 feet for as long as we've lived here," I said, keeping my voice even. "And the Architectural Change Committee approved these exact plans. Nothing has changed." "The board's clarification has changed, Cole," she replied smoothly. "And as you know, board resolutions supersede prior ACC approvals when there's a discrepancy in interpretation. We're simply trying to maintain a uniform aesthetic for the benefit of everyone's property values." She gestured vaguely at the street, as if my 18 inches of fence were a blight upon the entire landscape. Several neighbors were out. Mike from next door was pretending to trim his hedges. A woman I didn't know was paused mid-stroll with her dog. It was a public performance, and I was the unwilling star. The humiliation was the point. "I'll have to review my documents," I said, the only response I could muster. It felt weak, but arguing with her on the sidewalk was a losing game. She controlled the venue. "Please do," she said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. "You'll be receiving a courtesy notice in the mail with the details. We're giving homeowners a generous 30 days to bring their properties into compliance." She made a neat checkmark on her sheet. The sound of the pen, a sharp, final click. "Have a wonderful afternoon." She turned and walked away, her posture perfect, Her mission accomplished. The shadow lifted, but the chill remained. I looked at my fence, then at the neighbors who were now studiously avoiding my gaze. And I knew this wasn't about 18 inches of wood. This was about something else entirely. That evening, the closing binder for our house sat open on the dining room table, like an artifact from a forgotten civilization. Sam, my wife, methodically sifted through the mountain of paper: the title report, the inspection summary, the mortgage agreement, while I stared out the window at the offending fence, now silhouetted against the twilight. Our home was our sanctuary, a quiet, orderly world we had built together. She, a brilliant data analyst who saw the world in patterns and probabilities. I, a structural engineer who believed in solid foundations and clear blueprints. We were a team that thrived on logic and reason. Karen Dawson was a variable we hadn't accounted for. "Here it is," Sam said, pulling a thick, stapled document from a sleeve. "The Northwood Pines CC&Rs. All 112 pages of soul-crushing legalese." She flipped through it, her brow furrowed. I came over and stood behind her, my hand on her shoulder. "Anything about clarifications?" "The board does have the power to enact rules and resolutions to interpret the covenants," she read. "But it also says any changes can't be applied retroactively to previously approved structures, unless they pose a direct threat to public safety." She looked up at me. "Is our fence a direct threat to public safety?" "Cole." "Only if you're a termite," I said. We both knew this was a power play. The question was, why we were quiet neighbors. We paid our dues on time. We kept our lawn mowed. Then I remembered, 2 years ago, at an annual meeting. I had made a proposal. A small group of us had worked up a plan to convert a perpetually swampy, unused parcel of common land into a community playground and garden. We had schematics, a budget, even volunteers lined up. Karen, newly elected as president, had shut it down with brutal efficiency. She spoke of aesthetic continuity, potential liabilities, and preserving the natural character of a muddy ditch. My proposal died on the floor. I hadn't thought much of it since, but I remembered the look of cold satisfaction on her face. I had challenged her vision for the community. She didn't forget things like that. Sam found another document tucked into the back of the binder, a copy of the CC&Rs left by the previous owner. A single section was highlighted in faded yellow marker. A ghostly message from the past. "Look at this," she said, pointing. I leaned in to read the highlighted text. "Figure 8.4.2 ACC approvals, once granted for a permanent exterior alteration, are considered final and binding. Such approvals shall not be retroactively rescinded or declared non-compliant by subsequent board actions or resolutions, absent a finding of fraudulent application or immediate safety hazard." A small smile touched my lips. Well, it seems the foundation is a little stronger than she thinks. "It's a start," Sam said, her analytical mind already calculating the next steps. "But she's not going to give up because of one clause. She'll just find another angle." She was right, of course. But for a moment, holding that piece of paper, I felt a surge of confidence. We had the facts. We had the rules on our side, in a logical world. That should be enough. We were not living in a logical world. The call came at 5:17 a.m. on October 5th. It wasn't a call, really. It was a sound, a violent percussive crunch of metal and wood that tore through the pre-dawn quiet and snapped me out of a dead sleep. I was out of bed before my eyes were fully open, my engineering brain instantly classifying the noise as a high-velocity impact. Sam was already sitting up, the glow of her phone illuminating her worried face. "Cole, what was that?" I pulled back the blinds. There, illuminated by the cold blue light of our motion-activated floodlight, was a silver Mustang convertible, or what was left of it. Its front end was buried in the space where the middle section of my cedar fence used to be. Splintered posts and shattered boards were strewn across the lawn. The car's engine ticked rhythmically in the sudden silence. A figure stumbled out of the driver's side door, lanky, unsteady, and sickeningly familiar. It was Brad Dawson, Karen Dawson's 17-year-old son, the princeling of Northwood Pines. He stared at the carnage, then at our house, a look of dull confusion on his face. He pulled out his phone. I turned to Sam, my voice flat and calm. Panic is a luxury you can't afford at the scene of an accident. Call 911. Single vehicle crash. Property damage. Driver appears disoriented, but ambulatory. Facts only. She nodded, her fingers already dialing, and pull up the doorbell camera feed from the last 5 minutes. That's why we worked. She handled digital. I handled analog. I slipped on my work boots and stepped out into the damp, cool air. The street smelled of burnt rubber and something cloyingly sweet, like a spilled energy drink. Brad was now leaning against the trunk of his wrecked car, his phone pressed to his ear. "Hey, man," he mumbled as I approached, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Crazy. Right your fence. It just, jumped out." I stopped a few feet away, crossing my arms. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him, then at the deep, curved skid marks gouged into the asphalt, a perfect black arc that told the entire story. He'd come around the corner far too fast, lost control, and my property had stopped his momentum. The silence made him nervous, before he could offer another theory on the physics of teleporting fences. His mother arrived. She wasn't walking. She was storming down the street in a silk robe and slippers, a suburban Valkyrie descending on the battlefield. She bypassed her son, bypassed the wreck, and came straight for me. "Maddox, what did you do?" she screeched. "Morning, Karen," I said evenly. "Your son just field-tested my fence's impact resistance. It failed. It's a trap fence. It's too close to the road. My Bradley could have been killed." Her voice was shrill with a practiced victimhood. "He seems fine," I observed. "My fence, on the other hand, is not." A single police cruiser rolled up then, its lights washing the scene in silent flashes of red and blue. A tired-looking officer stepped out, his eyes taking in the whole tableau: the car, the splinters, the HOA queen in her robe, and me. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weariness of 1,000 domestic disputes. Karen was on him instantly. "Officer, thank goodness this man, Cole Maddox, has an illegal fence. It's a public menace. It attacked my son's car. I want him cited. I want him to pay for the damages." The officer looked from her to the skid marks, then back to the fence. He gave a slow, deliberate blink. He'd heard it all before. He turned to me. "Your property, sir." "That's right," I said. He walked over to Brad. "Son, have you been drinking tonight?" "No, sir," Brad slurred, a little too quickly. The officer leaned in slightly, then took a half step back. "I'm going to need you to come over to my cruiser and run a few simple tests." As Karen began to protest, another officer arrived and started methodically searching the Mustang. He paused, opened the passenger door, and leaned in. A moment later, he backed out, holding a small, blue metal canister and a handful of used whippet chargers. He held them up for his partner to see. Nitrous oxide. Brad's face went white. Karen's jaw fell open. The first officer cuffed Brad with a practiced efficiency. Probable cause was established, and he was transported for a blood draw. The tow truck arrived. The story Karen wanted to tell had been shredded as thoroughly as my fence. But the real fight hadn't even begun. The next afternoon, the mail carrier handed me a certified letter. I signed for it, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. It was from the HOA management company. I opened it to find a formal violation notice, printed on heavy letterhead. It cited CCNRs, Grugger 7.3, alleging my fence was non-compliant with the 15-foot setback. It gave me 14 days to completely remove the offending structure or request a hearing. It assessed an initial fine and warned of further penalties. I looked at the top corner of the letter. It was dated October 4th, the day before the crash. The courtesy notice she'd mentioned on the sidewalk had never been sent. This was the first official communication. She hadn't just reacted to her son's crash by lashing out. She had already set the trap. The crash had simply sprung it ahead of schedule. The fight was no longer about a fence. It was about her calculated, premeditated abuse of power. The board hearing, held on the evening of October 22nd, was a masterclass in bureaucratic theater. It took place in the Northwood Pines Clubhouse, a cavernous beige room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and quiet desperation. About a dozen homeowners were scattered among the folding chairs, their faces etched with the familiar boredom of those who had been forced to debate the acceptable shades of mailbox paint one too many times. Sam sat beside me, a leather-bound portfolio resting in her lap. She was my rock, her calm presence a silent counterpoint to the farce unfolding before us. At the head table sat Karen, flanked by her two loyal board members, a retired sales manager named Stan, and a woman named Brenda, who seemed to communicate exclusively through enthusiastic nodding. The fourth board member, a quiet accountant named George, sat at the far end, studying a spreadsheet as if it held the secrets to the universe. Karen called the meeting to order, her voice resonating with a false warmth. After droning through the minutes of the last meeting and a lengthy update on autumn landscaping, she arrived at the main event. New business. Item A, violation hearing for 112 Oak Street, she announced, her eyes finding mine in the small crowd. Mr. Maddox, you have requested this hearing to appeal the violation notice issued on October 4th regarding a non-compliant fence structure. The floor is yours. I stood and walked to the small lectern set up for residents. I placed my file on it and opened it. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice steady. I'm here tonight to present evidence that the violation notice issued against my property is invalid. The notice claims my fence violates the 15-foot setback rule. However, my fence was built 3 years ago based on plans that were reviewed and formally approved by this community's Architectural Change Committee. I slid a document out of my file and held it up. This is the original ACC approval form, signed by the committee chair at the time. It clearly shows the plot plan, the materials, and the location of the fence. It was deemed fully compliant with all governing documents, including Section 7.3. I walked over and placed the document on the table in front of George, who took it and began to study it with interest. Karen watched me, a small dismissive smile on her face. Thank you, Mr. Maddox. While the board appreciates you keeping such meticulous records, your point is moot. As you were informed, the board recently passed a resolution clarifying the interpretation of Section 7.3. This resolution was passed to ensure uniformity and grants the board, specifically the president, discretionary authority in matters of community aesthetics and safety. A discretionary authority that supersedes a prior. Formal approval, I asked. In this case, yes, Karen said without hesitation. The previous ACC overlooked the potential hazard posed by a structure so close to the corner. The potential hazard that only became apparent after your son crashed his car into it, I countered. Stan and Brenda shifted uncomfortably. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. The timing is irrelevant, Karen snapped, her composure cracking for a fraction of a second. The board's resolution stands. Then, I'd like to see a copy of that resolution, I said, and the minutes from the meeting where it was voted upon. Karen waved a hand dismissively. That's an internal board matter. Mr. Maddox, we're not here to debate board procedure. We're here to rule on your violation. I'm not so sure it's an internal matter, I said, pulling out the highlighted copy of the CC&Rs. According to Section 8.4.2 of our governing documents. And I quote, ACC approvals, once granted for a permanent exterior alteration, are considered final and binding. Such approval shall not be retroactively rescinded or declared non-compliant by subsequent board actions or resolutions. I let the words hang in the air. George, the accountant, looked up from the approval form, his eyebrows raised. He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at Karen. He has a point. Karen, that language is quite specific. Karen's face hardened. George, that clause is intended to prevent frivolous changes. This is a matter of safety and aesthetic harmony. The resolution grants me the authority to make a judgment call, and I have made it. The fence is non-compliant. She looked at Stan and Brenda. I call for a vote to uphold the violation and the associated fines. I vote to uphold, Stan said immediately. Uphold, Brenda echoed, nodding vigorously. Karen looked at George. George. He hesitated, looking from the document in his hands to my face, then to Karen's. He let out a quiet sigh of defeat. I vote to abstain. The motion carries. 2-0 with 1 abstention, Karen announced, slamming her gavel down with a sharp crack. Mr. Maddox, the violation is upheld. You have 14 days to remove the fence. Fines of $100 per day will begin accruing immediately, retroactive to the date of the notice. This hearing is concluded. I stood at the lectern, stunned. I had presented concrete, documented evidence. I had quoted the community's own governing documents, and it had meant nothing. The system wasn't just biased. It was a complete sham, a tool for her personal vendettas. As we packed up our things, Sam's hand found mine under the table and squeezed. This isn't over, she whispered fiercely. I looked at Karen, who was now smiling and chatting with Brenda. The picture of magnanimity. She had won. She had beaten the facts with sheer, brute force power. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was just the beginning. The fines were a nuisance. Her real goal was bigger. She wanted to break us. The drive home from the hearing was silent. The methodical, logical world I operated in had been turned upside down. Evidence had been dismissed. Rules had been ignored. And a lie had been ratified by a formal vote. We couldn't fight this on her terms. The game was rigged. We can't win by defending, I said, breaking the silence as we pulled into our driveway. We have to go on offense. Sam nodded, her expression grim. She's insulated. The board is her rubber stamp, and the management company just does what she says. Arguing with them is like arguing with a brick wall. So we don't argue with the wall, I said, a new resolve hardening inside me. We find out what's behind it. That night, our dining room table transformed into a war room. Sam, my digital warrior, fired up her laptop and began her assault on the Northwood Pines online portal. I spread out the mess of documents from our closing binder, looking for a weakness, an overlooked detail. The power she claimed, discretionary authority, it has to come from somewhere. I muttered, scanning the bylaws. It can't just be invented. I think I found something, Sam said. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. She pointed to her screen. The meeting minutes. I'm going back a full year. Most of them are boilerplate nonsense pool maintenance, gutter cleaning schedules. But look at this one, from 11 months ago. I leaned over her shoulder. The minutes for the September board meeting were mostly normal, until a section near the end. New business. Item C, zoning variance request. Pinnacle Homes, LLC. The subsequent paragraph, which should have detailed the discussion, was a solid block of black. It had been heavily redacted. Redacted, I said. Why would HOA minutes be redacted? Exactly, Sam said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. It says the motion to approve the board's support for the variance request passed 3-1. George was the only nay vote. Pinnacle Homes. The name sounded vaguely familiar. They were a high-end developer that had built a few McMansions on the edge of the county. What kind of variance would they need the HOA's support for? I wondered aloud. That's the question, Sam said, and I have a feeling Karen doesn't want anyone to know the answer. My path was clearer. The HOA documents were a closed loop, controlled by Karen. I needed to go outside the system. I needed official records, the kind that couldn't be redacted or reinterpreted. The next morning, I took a personal day and drove to the county recorder's office. The building was a drab, bureaucratic maze, but it held one thing: Karen couldn't control public records. My plan was to get the official plat map for our subdivision, but navigating the county's archaic filing system was a nightmare. After an hour of fruitless searching on a sluggish microfilm reader, I was about to give up when I remembered a name from our home inspection report. Mr. Abernathy, a retired county surveyor who did freelance consulting. He was old school, sharp as a tack, and notoriously cranky. He was perfect. I found his number and called. He remembered our property. When I explained the situation, the dispute over the setback line, Karen's claims of discretionary authority, he let out a gravelly chuckle. An HOA president inventing rules. Stop the presses. He grunted. Son, you're looking in the wrong place. The HOA's little map is just a pretty picture for their sales brochures. The only map that matters is the one filed with this office. The official plat map. That's the legal document that defines every property line, easement, and setback down to the inch. We met for coffee an hour later. Arthur Abernathy was a small, wiry man, in his late 70s, with a mind like a steel trap. I laid out all our documents on the table. He barely glanced at the HOA violation. Instead, he zeroed in on the title report from our closing. Here we go, he said, tapping a paragraph with a gnarled finger. See this? Subject to all easements, covenants, and restrictions of record. The key phrase is of record. That means filed with the county. If it's not on the plat, it's just a suggestion. With Abernathy's guidance, we went back to the recorder's office. In less than 15 minutes, he had located the master plat for Northwood Pines. Section 4. He unfurled the large blueprint on a table. It was a dense web of lines, numbers, and symbols. To me, it was chaos. To him, it was a language. Okay, here's your lot. 112 Oak Street, he said, his finger tracing a precise rectangle. And here's the platted setback line. He took out a small ruler and measured 15 feet from the curb, just like the rule says. Then he measured from the line to my property boundary. And your fence, as shown on this ACC approval you have, is built directly on your property line, which is a full 16.5 feet from the curb. He looked up at me over the top of his reading glasses. You're not 18 inches over. Son, You're 18 inches inside the line. Your fence is 100% compliant. The relief was so profound it almost made me dizzy. So I can prove it. It's right here. Yep, Abernathy said. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes were scanning the rest of the map, his brow furrowed. But that's not the interesting part. His finger drifted to an adjacent, undeveloped parcel of land. A large, wedge-shaped lot that sat on a small rise behind my property, and the two next to it. This is. He pointed to a faint, dotted line that cut across the corner of that lot. Next to it was a small, almost illegible annotation. He squinted. Prop. V. C. ESMT. Proposed View Corridor Easement. He translated. Someone wants to make sure that nothing ever blocks the view from this specific corner of the property. He looked at the parcel number, then turned to a county computer terminal. He typed for a few moments, his fingers surprisingly nimble. A property record database popped up. Owner of record for Parcel 7B is Northwood Properties Group, LLC. He read, which is a subsidiary of. He clicked another link. Pinnacle Homes. The name from the redacted minutes. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. Abernathy wasn't done. He opened another browser tab and navigated to the state's corporate commission website. He typed in Pinnacle Homes, LLC. A list of corporate officers appeared. CEO, CFO, COO, all names I didn't recognize. Then he clicked a link for associated filings and registered agents. And there it was. Listed as a silent partner in a secondary holding company that was the primary investor in Pinnacle Homes was a name I knew all too well. Karen Dawson. Abernathy leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be. Your fence isn't the problem, son. It's the obstacle. He explained it in simple, devastating terms. The lot behind us was the premier lot in Pinnacle's planned new phase of development. From that specific rise, you could see the distant city skyline, a multi-million-dollar view. My fence, and more specifically, the mature cypress trees planted just inside it, were partially obscuring the view from the corner where they planned to build the master suite of a massive spec home. Karen wasn't trying to enforce a rule. She was using a fabricated rule violation to force me to tear down my fence so her business partners could secure a more profitable view. The street racing, Brad's crash that was a messy, emotional sideshow. This was the real story. It wasn't a personal vendetta. It was cold, calculated, financial corruption. The revelation in the county recorder's office changed everything. The fight was no longer defensive. It was a counteroffensive. We had the truth. A truth anchored in official records and public documents. But truth is only powerful if you can get people to listen. While I had been digging through blueprints with Abernathy, Sam had been chipping away at Karen's digital fortress. She had managed to find an unredacted version of the September meeting, minutes on a cached page from the management company's old website. Before they'd upgraded their system, the unredacted text confirmed it. Pinnacle Homes had requested the HOA's official support for a zoning variance to allow for a slightly smaller lot size in their new development phase, arguing that the premium view lots would increase the value of the entire community. Karen had championed the proposal. George had argued against it, citing concerns about density and precedent. He had been outvoted. The pieces were all there. Karen's financial stake, the proposed development, the fabricated fence violation, the pressure campaign. It was a clear, straight line of corruption. Karen must have sensed the shift in the wind. Perhaps she'd heard I was asking questions, or perhaps her guilty conscience was making her paranoid. Whatever the reason, she escalated. On November 12th, the next official-looking envelope arrived. This one wasn't just a notice. It was a notice of intent to place a lien. The unpaid fines, now totaling over $2,000 including administrative fees, were being formally levied against our property. If we didn't pay, the HOA could, eventually, foreclose on our home. The paper felt heavy in my hand. The formal legal language, a tangible threat. This was the moment the conflict became existential. It was one thing to fight over fines. It was another thing entirely to fight for your home. The same afternoon, my next-door neighbor, Mike, shuffled over to my driveway, a similar envelope clutched in his hand. His face, usually a mask of cheerful obliviousness, was pale with worry. "Cole, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I got one of these things." He handed me the letter. It was a formal violation notice. His infraction, the two small, whimsical garden gnomes that had flanked his walkway for the better part of a decade. The notice cited a rule against non-approved lawn ornaments and assessed an immediate fine of $50. I looked at his gnomes, then across the street at Brenda's front yard, which was proudly adorned with a flock of 5 plastic pink flamingos. "This rule has never been enforced," I said. "Never," Mike said, his voice rising in panic. "What do I do? Cole, do I have to get rid of them? My grandkids gave them to me." I knew exactly what this was. It was a warning shot, aimed not at Mike, but at me. Karen was isolating me, demonstrating to the other residents that anyone who was friendly with me could become a target. Support Cole Maddox. The message read, "And you're next." It was a classic bully tactic, designed to make me a pariah. It presented me with a difficult choice. I could focus solely on my own fight, which was now a high-stakes battle for my home. Or I could expand the battlefield, risk diluting my message, and defend Mike. Defending him would mean taking on more risk, but abandoning him felt like conceding to her tactics, letting her divide and conquer. That night, I saw something that solidified my decision. I was taking the trash out late when I saw a car parked at the curb down the street, its engine off, its lights out. It was Karen's Lexus. She was just sitting inside, alone in the dark, staring at the front of her own house. The defiant mask of the HOA president was gone. In the faint glow of a street lamp, I could see the slump of her shoulders, the tired line of her jaw. It was a brief, unguarded moment, a glimpse of a parent's private grief and defeat in the wake of her son's escalating legal troubles. It didn't excuse her actions. It didn't absolve her of the corruption or the bullying. But it made her real. It reminded me that this whole ugly affair was rooted in a recognizable, human brokenness. And it made me realize I couldn't fight her by becoming like her. I had to fight for the principles she had abandoned: fairness, transparency, and community. I had to defend Mike. The annual homeowners meeting was scheduled for November 18th. It was our only chance to present our case, not to Karen's kangaroo court, but to the entire community. I sent a formal request to the management company to be added to the agenda. Citing my right as a homeowner to address the membership, I was granted a 5-minute speaking slot. 5 minutes to dismantle an empire. The clubhouse meeting room on the night of the annual meeting was packed. Every folding chair was taken, and a line of people stood along the back wall. The air was thick with a mixture of civic duty, neighborly resentment, and the faint scent of stale coffee. This wasn't a routine meeting. The lien notice, the gnome violation, and the rampant rumors had turned it into an event. Karen sat at the head table, looking poised and in control. But a certain tension in her jaw betrayed the pressure she was under. George, the accountant, sat at his end of the table, his papers arranged in obsessively neat stacks. The other 2 board members flanked Karen like nervous bookends. On a large screen behind them, A PowerPoint presentation displayed the meeting agenda. Next to it, a large, bright red digital clock was projected, currently displaying the time. Karen announced that, in the interest of efficiency, each speaker on the agenda would be strictly held to their allotted 5 minutes. The clock would serve as the official timer. It was meant to be a tool of control, to keep dissenting voices brief and contained. It would prove to be her undoing. I was the last speaker on the agenda. I sat next to Sam, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I am not a natural public speaker. I prefer the certainty of blueprints and stress formulas to the unpredictability of a crowd. But in my lap was a folder containing the fruits of weeks of research, the ACC approval, the highlighted CC&R clause, the official plat map, and the printouts from the county and state websites. I had the facts. I just had to get them out. Finally, after an agonizing hour of budget reports and landscaping debates, Karen's voice cut through the drone. Our final speaker is Mr. Cole Maddox of 112 Oak Street. Mr. Maddox, you have 5 minutes. As I walked to the lectern, the giant red clock on the screen reset to 5:00. It began to count down. 4:59, 4:58. I placed my folder on the lectern and looked out at the faces of my neighbors. They were wary, curious, tired. They wanted this to be over. "Good evening," I began, my voice clearer than I expected. "My name is Cole Maddox. Most of you know me because of my fence. But I'm not here to talk about my fence tonight. I'm here to talk about our rules and who they apply to." The clock showed 4:40. "I'd like to start by talking about my neighbor, Mike Gable." I gestured to Mike, who looked up in surprise. "Last week, Mike received a violation notice for 2 garden gnomes he's had for 10 years. He was fined for violating a rule against lawn ornaments." I pressed a button on the remote for the projector. The agenda disappeared and was replaced by a photo I had taken that morning of Mike's 2 cheerful gnomes. "These are the offending ornaments," I said. Then I clicked again. A new photo appeared beside the first, a shot of board member Brenda's front lawn, featuring her flock of pink flamingos. And these, which have been in place for years, have received no such violation. The rules, it seems, are being applied selectively. This isn't about maintaining standards. It's about sending a message. It's about intimidation. The clock showed 4:02. A murmur went through the room. Brenda's face turned a shade of pink that matched her flamingos. "And that brings me to my own case." I continued, my rhythm building. "I was told my fence violates a setback rule. I was fined thousands of dollars. And the board has now filed a lien against my home." I clicked the remote, my original. Signed ACC approval form appeared on the screen. The signature clear and bold. This is the approval I received from the HOA 3 years ago. Karen started to speak. "Mr. Maddox, as was explained in your hearing." "Please," I said, holding up a hand. "I have the floor." The countdown timer gave me an authority she couldn't override. President Dawson claims a new board clarification gives her the power to retroactively invalidate this approval. The clock showed 3:15. I clicked again. The highlighted text of CC&R's Paragraph 8.4.2 filled the screen. "But our own governing documents say that's not allowed," I said, my voice rising with emphasis. "ACC approvals shall not be retroactively rescinded. It's not ambiguous. It's the rule, and the board has knowingly and deliberately broken it." The murmurs grew louder. People were leaning forward now, their boredom replaced by rapt attention. The clock showed 2:30. "So why? Why go to all this trouble to break your own rules and harass homeowners over a compliant fence?" I couldn't understand it. So I went to the county recorder's office to find the truth. I clicked. The official county plat map appeared on the left of the screen. On the right, I projected the informal, simplified map from the HOA's website. I used the laser pointer on the remote. This is the official, legal map of our community. And this is my property line. The red dot hovered over the map. My fence is well inside the setback. It is 100% compliant. But that's not the real story. The clock showed 1:45. The red dot moved to the undeveloped lot behind my house. The real story is here, on this lot, owned by a developer called Pinnacle Homes. You can see here on the official map a proposal for something called a view corridor easement. This developer needs a clear line of sight from this spot to maximize the value of the home they plan to build. My fence and the trees on my property are in the way. The room was dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the projector. The clock showed 0:59. And why is our HOA president so concerned with the developer's profits? Why did she use her power to support their zoning variance last year? A fact that was redacted from the public minutes. I clicked one last time. On the left, the redacted minutes from the HOA website. On the right, a screenshot from the State Corporate Commission's public database. An arrow pointed to a name on the list of partners in the LLC that owned Pinnacle Homes. Karen Dawson. The clock hit 0:05. I'm not asking you to believe me, I said, my voice ringing with finality as I looked directly at my neighbors. I'm asking you to believe these public documents. This was never about a fence. It was about a conflict of interest. It was about one person abusing the power we gave her for her own financial gain. No. The red numbers flashed to 0. A collective gasp went through the room. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved or spoke. The silence was absolute. Karen Dawson sat frozen at the table, her face a mask of pure shock and fury. She had been so focused on the countdown, so sure that my time would run out before I could make a point, that she never saw the evidentiary guillotine I had built.
Then the dam broke.
It started, not with a shout, but with a single, clear voice from the back of the room. It was George, the accountant, who had pushed his chair back and stood up. Madam President, he said, his voice shaking but firm, I believe we have a serious problem. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions, demanding answers. Karen banged her gavel, but the sound was lost in the chaos. Her authority had evaporated in the space of 300 seconds. George made his way to the front of the room. I make a motion, he called out over the din, to immediately freeze all pending violation fines and lien actions until a full, independent audit of this board's decisions can be conducted. Second came a dozen voices at once. All in favor, George yelled. A forest of hands shot up. Opposed only Karen, Stan, and Brenda kept their hands down. The motion passed. Another homeowner stood. I move for a formal censure of President Dawson for failure to disclose a financial conflict of interest. Second. The vote was a landslide. Stan and Brenda, seeing the complete collapse of their power base, voted with the crowd, abandoning their leader in a desperate act of self-preservation. Karen sat alone at the table, a queen without a court, as the community she had ruled with an iron fist dismantled her reign, piece by piece. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. The independent audit confirmed everything I had presented, and more. It uncovered a pattern of steering contracts to preferred vendors and questionable expenditures. A special meeting was called, and a recall vote was held. Karen and her two cronies were removed from the board in a stunning rebuke. George was elected the new interim president. He asked me to join the new board, but I politely declined. I had no desire for power. I only wanted fairness. Instead, I agreed to chair a new oversight committee, tasked with rewriting the bylaws to ensure greater transparency and accountability. Our first proposal, which passed unanimously, was a simple one. All board votes had to be public, and any financial interest in matters before the board required immediate recusal. The final surprise came a month later. Pinnacle Homes, facing a newly empowered and deeply suspicious HOA, as well as potential legal action for conspiracy, quietly withdrew their development plans. In a press release that dripped with corporate doublespeak about reevaluating market conditions, they announced a goodwill gesture to the community of Northwood Pines. They were donating the disputed parcel of land to the HOA to be preserved as permanent community green space. At the next board meeting, George brought up the newly acquired land. "We'll need to decide on the best use for this property," he said. "Does anyone have any proposals?" He smiled at me. And so, the following spring, where a $1 million view was once planned, the sounds of construction began. Not for a mansion, but for a playground. The playground I had proposed 2 years ago, built now as a symbol of a community that had taken its power back. My new fence is made of black steel, its foundation set deep in concrete. It is strong, simple, and unimpeachably compliant. Sometimes, in the evenings, Sam and I will sit on the porch and watch the kids on the new playground, their laughter carrying on the breeze. We see Mike next door, his gnomes standing proudly by his walkway, and he gives us a little wave. The neighborhood feels different now, lighter, more honest. We fought a war over 18 inches of ground, but the territory we won was much larger. We won back the simple peace of mind that comes from knowing the rules are real, and that they apply to everyone, no matter how powerful they think they are.